This is the task that I've been given on transplanting a patient with locally advanced HCC, and I'm going to talk specifically about our experience in India. What I would like to say at the outset is that defining locally advanced HCC in the liver transplant setting for a liver transplant or an HP surgeon is a little different from what has been portrayed otherwise. We all know that the HCC is a very wide spectrum. You can have early HCCs ranging from a single lesion to up to 3 tumors, none more than 3 centimeters in size, to multifocal HCCs and then large HCCs with vascular involvement. So if we look at what we've been following for more than 2 decades now, the BCLC staging system, which has undergone its revisions, I feel that there are 2, in fact, groups among the entire groups, which we are not addressing in terms of cure. So rather than just addressing the advanced stage or the portal invasion where you're putting these patients on sorafenib for some sort of survival advantage, even in the multinodular ones, we are looking at a 3-year survival of only 10 to 40% when we are offering them TACE or sorafenib. And you are keeping them away from actually the curative options, that is resection and liver transplantation. And that is why in real life, I believe that multifocal HCC and a large HCC with portal vein tumor thrombosis both should be considered as advanced HCC and probably looked at together, because the treatment options then are limited given the criteria that have been set or the conventional criteria that we follow. But then we have to look at how to advance in these patients. And why I say real life is because in spite of all the surveillance, in spite of everything, we find that most of the patients that we see, 60 to 70% of the HCC patients, when they reach us as a specialist surgeon or a gastroenterologist or hepatologist, belong to this particular group of tumors. So is there anything at all that we could offer at least to a few of these patients with locally advanced HCC? Of course, you need to rule out extrahepatic disease, and I'm not talking about advanced HCC with extrahepatic disease at all. And can we improve their survival? So coming to the first group, where it's multinodular or multifocal HCC, and here basically I would be talking about beyond size number criteria, because again, this is something after the seminal paper by Mazzaferro et al. In 1996 that we've been following for more than 20 years now, more than 2 decades. This has been accepted as the conventional criteria since 1998 by the UNOS. But we are also aware that there have been several expansions of criteria, and they have shown results which are equivalent to or sometimes better than the Milan criteria, both in the DDLT as well as in the LDLT setting. And what has happened over the years, and what has happened especially in the Asian countries where DDLT is not very common, is that there has been a significant expansion beyond Milan. And the main impetus today has shifted from number and size to no extrahepatic disease and no gross vascular invasion. What has also happened is the identification of tumor biology as something that is the king, something that ultimately determines outcomes in these patients. And that's why you will see that biological criteria, more than morphological criteria, have been adopted by many of these selection criteria as well as many of the liver societies to define which patient can be taken up for transplantation. So tumor biology is the king, and it's not just size and numbers, it's something that is more and more now become a realization. So our selection criteria for an upfront LDLT in HCC patients at Medanta has been all patients who have no extrahepatic disease, who have no major vascular invasion by tumor on preoperative imaging, that's portal vein, hepatic veins, or the IVC, no medical contraindication to liver transplant, and irrespective of tumor size and number. So this has been our experience of the 2,348, and I stopped at this basically because I wanted to look at patients who had a minimum follow-up of 2 to 2.5 years. So the total number of patients with HCC cirrhosis whom we transplanted, 469, excluding the patients who had DDLT or who did not have HCC on explant pathology, or those patients who had portal vein tumor thrombosis. And I'll come to this in the second part of my talk. We had 405 patients whom we transplanted, which makes up about 17.2% of all the transplants that we've done. As of now, we have around 587 patients. And what's important is we had 43% of patients who are outside the UCSF criteria, 51% of patients who are outside the Milan criteria. This is our overall survival at 5 years, 64% overall survival at 5 years. And if you go to 10 years, of course, number of patients who are there are limited. It's about 55%. Disease-free survival of 57%. So is this acceptable? And I think this is what we looked at the working group of the ILTS, which was held last year. I was a part of that. And we defined that if you go beyond criteria, slightly beyond criteria, and expand your criteria in the LDLT setting, if you have a survival of 60% at 5 years, then yes, you are able to benefit some patients and you are able to go by the transplant benefit concept. And if we excluded the post-operative deaths in our series, our 5-year overall survival was 67%, including them, it was 64%. But is that enough? In today's world, are you looking at a 67% 5-year survival? Probably not, because now you're looking at personalized medicine. You're looking at going beyond convention, but then it should be to give the best outcomes in an individual patient. And therefore, when we looked at the prognostic factors for recurrence in our series, we found that if you have an alpha-fetoprotein more than 100 nanogram per ml, if you have a beyond UCSF tumor, and if you have FDG18 PET avidity, these are the poor prognostic factors, and they give rise to a higher recurrence rate. And when we stratified our patients according to these particular factors, that's either the presence or absence of these factors or combination of these factors, if you look at this, if they have no poor prognostic factor or a single poor prognostic factor, then they are at a low risk of recurrence. If they have a combination of either a high AFP with FDG18 PET avidity or FDG18 PET avidity and a beyond UCSF criteria tumor, then they have a moderate risk of recurrence. And if they have the presence of all three, that means if they have all three poor prognostic factors present, or a special group, if they have an AFP more than 500, and if they have FDG18 PET, if they have a beyond UCSF tumor, then you find that they are at high risk. And these are actually the recurrence rates in them: 9% for low risk, 25% for moderate risk, and 46% for high risk. And therefore, we arrived at a prognostic model where we propose this algorithm. If you have a low risk, if you don't have any of those factors or a single risk factor, you can go ahead and have good outcomes with an upfront LDLT. If you have a moderate risk, then you propose downstaging in these patients. And as has been alluded to by Ashwati as well as Dr. Baijal, there are some of these patients who cannot undergo downstaging treatment. They are child C patients who are not candidates for downstaging. In those patients, you have to take a specific decision whether you want to go ahead with transplanting these patients because they cannot be downstaged, and counsel them with a 25% recurrence. But the better option is to downstage these patients. And high-risk patients, there is no way that you can transplant them straight away. They need to be downstaged, and the end point of downstaging should be converting them to a low-risk patient. And therefore, you will now see that from level 1 evidence, we are incorporating level 2 evidence into our clinical practice and trying to use downstaging modalities like TARE to downstage and actually transplant these patients with multinodular HCC. So in multifocal HCC, I think the take-home points is with a modest expansion of criteria, you can get good survival outcomes. Our prognostic model perhaps is the first which in an LDLT setting in such a large group of patients combines morphological and biological criteria to help you decide whether you should go ahead for upfront liver transplantation, LDLT, versus post-downstaging LDLT. And that's most relevant for us in India because of the DDLT scenario. A thorough preoperative evaluation to rule out extrahepatic disease is mandatory and should be combined with a stringent follow-up to detect early recurrence. What about this other group of patients in whom you have portal vein tumor thrombosis? And we all would agree that if you have a portal vein tumor thrombosis with an HCC, lightning strikes, and for everyone, for the patient as well as the surgeon, probably they think it's the end of the road, nothing can be done further. And what's the reason for this I give up approach? I think number one reason is that it is usually assumed that if it is in the blood, it is systemic. Secondly, if you leave a PVTT HCC patient untreated or you give him palliative treatment with just the tyrosine kinase inhibitors, you're looking at a median overall survival of about 2 to 11 months and a 10% overall survival of about 3 years. And thirdly, none of the guidelines actually say you can do anything in these patients. Neither are they candidates for resection nor for TACE. And of course, they are an absolute contraindication for liver transplantation. And hence, the question always arises, what should I do? this concept about vascular invasion being a systemic disease, I think there is no definitive evidence for this. But for example, if you look at the metro ticket model, this was in 2009. Even if you have a 6 centimeter tumor with a macrovascular tumor invasion, you would still look at a 45% survival at 5 years. And if the above statement was true, that vascular invasion is systemic disease, I do not think you would have been looking at this case. The first series that was published on living donor liver transplantation for macrovascular invasion, being not a absolute contraindication, came from the Seoul National Group. And look at this, they never used any downstaging therapy, and they went up for an upfront LDLT, and they were able to achieve a 5-year overall survival of 63.6%. They found that AFP, having a tumor thrombus in the main portal vein, having a high SUV ratio on FDG18 PET, and the largest size, more than 7 centimeters, were poor prognostic factors. This was published, in fact, in 2017, but you will find that our interest in this subject, we presented this in 2015 at the ILDLT in Seoul, and we looked exactly at the same group of patients. These were BP2 patients, that is either in the second order branch or in BP1, that is those which are not initially known to have macrovascular invasion. We had 13 patients, and we actually took them up straight away for LDLT, and we could achieve 3-year overall and recurrence-free survival of 72% and 71%. At this time, there was increasing influence of the use of radiotherapy in HCC patients with PVTT. These were the initial series which came out in 2013 and 2014. Then was the advent of TARE, which showed that TARE was much better as compared to TACE. And so we thought to ourselves that LT straight away in the presence of PVTT is not something great. We have to look for something that can give us much better survival. And then when it comes to BP3 and BP4, that is either the first order branch or main portal vein, you're not going to be right in doing a transplant straight away. At the same time, there were some case reports or very small series. The one down here was the largest series till date before we published our series of 17 patients where they used transarterial chemoembolization and radiotherapy. This was from the ASAN group, where they could downstage patients and take them for transplant. This was a single case report. This was the use of chemoradiation therapy to transplant patients. So that's when in 2015, we actually started a protocol where in patients who had BP2, BP3, BP4 tumor thrombosis, we downstage them using TARE and SBRT and then went on to transplant. We looked at our patients, they were all into a protocol, and then in 2020, that's just 2 months back, we published this. This is published now in Transplantation, and this happens to be the largest series till date of LDLT in downstage patients. This was the classification that we used. This is the liver cancer study group classification, where if you would look, this is called segmental portal vein tumor thrombus, that's VP1 and VP2, and VP3, VP4 is what we call or refer to as lobar portal vein tumor thrombus. And in the same series that I showed you, these 46 patients, 21 of them were those in the early period where we went ahead with upfront transplant without actually downstaging these patients. And these are the 25 patients since 2015 whom we have serially downstaged and then went on to transplant. This is the protocol that we used. So initially, liver function, triphasic CT angio, a whole body FDG18 PET scan, as well as a technetium-99 bone scan. Very important, rule out extrahepatic disease. We have now gone on and we published this also, use of EUS FNAC of suspicious lymph nodes to rule out extrahepatic disease. So every care has to be taken to make sure that you're not dealing with a patient who already has extrahepatic disease, because then it's worthless to do a transplant in that patient. Next, you have to look at the liver function. So all these patients are not actually, it's not feasible to do radiotherapy in these patients, neither SBRT nor TARE. So you have to have a bilirubin less than 5. In fact, less than 3.5 is something that the interventional radiologist or the radiation oncologist would prefer. There should be no gross ascites, child's A or child's B, more than 700 cc of non-tumorous liver, and then they enter into a protocol, which is usually TARE1 followed by SBRT followed by TARE2. They are put on sorafenib from 1 week after downstaging to 1 week pre-transplant. Response evaluation with a PET CT every 4 weeks from 6 to 12 weeks onwards. And the definition of response or the definition of downstaging is when there is complete disappearance of arterial enhancement in FPG18 avidity, and if required, even additional 1 to 2 sessions of SPRT are required. The important thing I'd like to stress on this again, after downstaging therapy in VP3, VP4, we have to wait for 6 to 12 weeks to watch for any evidence of disease progression and transplant them only if the disease was stable. So these are just examples, pre-SPRT, post-SPRT. You'll see the fiducials out there placed for the SPRT. And you will find a complete disappearance of the right portal vein tumor thrombus in this. There's a loss of FPG18 avidity and in the tumor as well over here in this FPG avid HCC. Similarly, with a combination of TARE and SPRT, you'll find that there's an arterially enhancing tumor here, thrombus here, which has disappeared. You've got a tumor thrombus in the main portal vein as well as a tumor here that also has disappeared post SPRT and TARE. So when we looked at our results, 53% overall survival at 5 years, 52% recurrence-free survival at 5 years. And if you were to exclude the perioperative deaths, we had two who died in the post-operative period of sepsis and of multi-organ failure, 57% overall survival at 60 months or 5 years. And if you compare this to the 10% 3-year survival that you're looking at, I think you are benefiting these patients with transplant. And that's where it conforms to what we call the transplant benefit concept, 57% at 5 years. And this is if you use palliative radiotherapy with or without sorafenib, 17% at 2 years, and 0 at almost 1.5 years down the line in these patients. Even if you compare it to data that has been published elsewhere, you will find that whether it is TARE, whether it is resection, TACE, sorafenib, this group of patients has had a transplant benefit. When we looked at the factors that predicted a good outcome in these patients, if you look at overall survival, it was the tumor grade 3, grade 4 tumor. And if you looked at recurrence-free survival, using ROC analysis, we had a cutoff of 400. And if they had an AFP at the time of diagnosis of more than 400, and if they had a delta AFP of less than 2000, that means you started off with, say, AFP level of 3,500, if at the end of downstaging, you were down to less than 1,000 in these patients, so the difference was more than 2,000, the delta AFP was more than 2,000, they usually had a good outcome. However, there are caveats to these. The conversion rate to transplantability in HCC patients with PVTT using downstaging therapy is only about 50 to 60%. So you start out with 100, you will be able to transplant about 50 to 60 of them, 40 of them will progress. Number two, as has been pointed out before, liver function does determine the feasibility of downstaging therapy. Number three, an adequate waiting period after successful downstaging is very, very important so that you don't get worse outcomes. So you have to be very meticulous in selecting your patients. Don't go lax just because you have good outcomes in 1 or 2 patients. The third patient will be a disaster if you don't actually be very meticulous in selecting them. So I think not all PVTT are equivalent to systemic spread. Some downstage patients with good tumor biology do well after LT successfully downstage using radiotherapy with or without TACE. In addition to a detailed evaluation pre-LT for extrahepatic disease, a stringent follow-up post-LDLT is mandatory in these patients to detect early recurrence so that this can be treated. And what is very important is that you have to decide what is best for each individual by having a multidisciplinary approach in these patients, whether it is in person or whether, as we do today, it is in today's world via a multidisciplinary meeting on Zoom or on Google Meets. And therefore, I think, to conclude, looking at this particular group of patients with locally advanced HCC, it may not really be the end of the road. There is some hope, and I think the best hope probably is in the form of a new liver. Thank you very much for your patient listening.
Thank you, Prashant. That is, as usual, an excellent summary, and the data that you've shown, particularly Indian data, particularly is relevant for our context. I think you answered a number of the questions that were coming up there as well. I think the one that probably needs to be answered is one that Dr. Abha had raised initially. Does SBRT make transplant more technically difficult?
Yeah, so that's a good question. And I think that the technical difficulty comes in when you're looking at usually a BP4 or a BP3, which is just very close to the confluence of the portal vein. So ultimately, it comes down to the hilum. So BP4 is where you have a tumor thrombus in the main portal vein. BP3 is where you have it in the first order branch. That means either in the right portal vein or the left portal vein. Therein, what happens is that if the radiotherapy is not very focused, then you may have issues at the hilum when you're dissecting. You can get a fibrosed hilum when you are dissecting. I can remember of only one patient, and that was a patient who had a BP3 tumor thrombus, who after we did the transplant at about 1 year after the transplant developed portal vein stenosis. And I think that this was some residual impact of, on the, just at the tip of the portal vein, which we use for anastomosis, which ultimately gave rise to this portal vein stenosis. So if you have a BP3 or a BP4, you may be better off by using an extension graft on the portal vein, going a little bit lower down to cut off, using an extension graft, and then doing the portal vein anastomosis. On the recipient side, you use an extension graft. But other than that, I think our radiation oncologists have been so good. They've been so good in focusing very well at only the thrombus and not at the rest of the part, that we've not really had problems. So out of the 25, I just remember this one case, and now we are at 43 patients post PVTT downstaging, and we've not really had too much of an issue.